Hi guys, it's me Shazza HD and welcome to the sprint race preview tonight. Great to see all you guys here for, of course, another live stream. Of course, earlier I did a very long stream of 5.5 hours, I think it was. Maybe just over 5.5 hours. And yeah, it was a brilliant qualifying session earlier on. Feels like it happened quite a few hours ago. It was only 4 hours ago, I think it was. It feels quite a bit longer than that, to be honest. Yeah, it was a great session. Lots of exciting things. Really exciting grid for Sunday's race. But of course, this stream is going to be doing or covering the sprint race, where we're going to be doing a full preview for the sprint race. And really what we're going to be doing is looking at what happened in qualifying today, the data from qualifying, the very important data. And from that, I will give my view as to what I think will most likely happen in the sprint race. And giving my view as to the pecking order and what it should be for the sprint race. And just to clarify, as I did in my weekend preview last night, there will be no prediction for the sprint race because the sprints are just too hard to predict. They're way too hard to predict, and that's why I'm not going to be doing so. And I'm expecting the Baku sprint to be absolute chaos, especially with them trialing, enabling DRS after just one lap. It's going to be, just absolutely mental in the, the sprint race tomorrow. So, there won't be a prediction from me, a final prediction from me as to what will actually happen. But, like I said, I'll go through the key data of qualifying. We'll get into that and how, in general, the pace is looking throughout the field. And then I'll go, as usual, team by team and look at how they all did today in qualifying and how they will most likely get on and what the keys are for those certain teams and drivers for the sprint race as well. But talking of qualifying, let's get into what the results were. Actually, quickly, as usual, no matter what time it is in your part of the world, hope you're all having as best today as possible, and great to see you guys here as usual. Let's get into the results of qualifying. Of course, these results do not set the grid for the sprint race, they set the grid for Sunday's race, but it does indicate as to what the pace or performance from all the teams is looking like this weekend. Charles Leclerc got his third consecutive pole position in Baku with just a brilliant lap. 0.2 of a second quicker than Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. Sergio Perez, third, 0.3 of a second off pole position. Both Red Bull drivers, I think, had an absolutely fine session. Leclerc was just the best driver in that little fight. And absolutely fully deserved the pole position he got. Carlos Sainz ended up in P4, 0.8 of a second though, away from his teammate. That is alarmingly bad. I mean, Leclerc is very quick here, but to be 0.8 away is, very poor. Lewis Hamilton ended up in P5, did the best really he could with what was or is around this track, a pretty poor Mercedes car. Of course, they're desperately waiting to get to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola so they can get this new upgrade on the car and properly get their season going. Fernando Alonso ended up in P6. That is despite DRS issues with both Aston Martins, and that's why their qualifying result was not as good as it should have been. Alonso, without those issues, probably would have been in P5. Maybe not P4, but I think definitely P5. Lance Stroll as well would have been better than what he did. Probably wouldn't have been ahead of Norris, but he would have been up in 8th place. So, Aston Martin definitely quicker than what they showed in qualifying. Lando Norris ended up in P7, very good lap from him, and McLaren certainly are looking much better after their new floor upgrade. And then the rest of the top 10, Yuki Tsunoda 8th. What a brilliant job by him. Lance Stroll 9th and Oscar Piastri in P10. And then the rest of the field, George Russell 11th, a very surprise elimination there in Q2, with Ocon 12th, Albon 13th, Bottas 14th, Sargent 15th, and then Zhou, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Gasly, and De Vries being the rest of the field. And yeah, Q1 and Q2 saw definitely some surprise eliminations. You know, Russell in Q2, maybe you could say Ocon as well, and then Gasly especially getting knocked out in Q1 after, of course, making an error on the exit of turn 3, and De Vries obviously ended up making a massive error at turn 3 as well. But let's get into the sector time data and look at just where certain teams were quick and not so quick. So the first sector is all about slow corner performance and performance in a straight line. And the Red Bull team were the kings in that area. As you'll see in a moment, they were also the kings in the final sector when it came to top speed as well. Ferrari only half a tenth away. And yeah, Red Bull in that first sector, I mean, visually on board, the car looked very, very good. And Red Bull and Ferrari, not necessarily for the final sector, but for the first two sectors, their car is clearly much faster than all the other cars on the grid. There is no doubt about that. The McLaren, though, of Lando Norris, very impressive in the first sector for him to be, well, quicker than all the other teams. Aston Martin, Alpine, Mercedes, and very impressive, obviously, to be quicker than Aston Martin and Mercedes, who have been, up until this point of the season, much quicker than the McLaren team. And as well, McLaren, a quarter of a second quicker than Mercedes in the first sector. Very, very impressive. And they absolutely have improved quite a bit. They are overall, for an entire lap, I would say, half a second better off now with this new upgrade than they were back in Melbourne even. And they weren't that bad with their pace in Melbourne. So, yeah, great to see McLaren improving so much. They have still got some clear weaknesses, as I'll get to later. Their straight line speed is still really poor. But, yeah, they are much better than they were before. Alonso and the Aston Martin will be very disappointed that his car, 3.5 tenths slower than the Red Bull in the first sector. Again, really, really slow, I have to say, in that first sector. And even with DRS issues, that is a pretty bad first sector for what I think Aston Martin would have expected their performance to be like in the first sector. So yeah, just not as quick through even the corners, the Aston Martin, compared to the Ferrari, as we'll see, especially in the middle sector coming up in a minute. The Alpine looking decent, I would say, if not good, but yeah, both drivers didn't quite overall for the lap, obviously, get their shit together, really, to make a good result for the Alpine team. Mercedes very poor in the first sector. Not necessarily surprised, because the first sector is full of, straights and slow corners. Their car just doesn't work in that type of environment. And then after that, the only other things to remark on in this first sector is, the surprising poor pace of Williams and Haas. I would have expected Albon to be a tenth and a half at least quicker than he was in the first sector. And the Haas team, I have no idea what was going on in that first sector, but they had no speed whatsoever, and that's why they ended up in P17 and P18. But Red Bull and Ferrari, clearly the two fastest teams. And then into Sector 2, which is where all of the corners are, really, for the track. Ferrari actually quicker than Red Bull, and not just quicker, but a tenth and a half quicker, which is quite a bit of time in that middle sector of 40 seconds. And that's, brilliant to see from Ferrari, because up until now, Red Bull normally in a sector where it's dominated by corners would be, quicker than Ferrari by that type of gap. So for Ferrari to turn that around is very positive to see. And I'm hoping this could be applied from now on to other racetracks for the Ferrari team, because if they can carry that on, going forward for the rest of the season, Ferrari might be able to compete with Red Bull a lot more if they can have that type of performance in the corners compared to Red Bull going forward. Again, with Aston Martin, very surprising they were that far off compared to Ferrari in a sector dominated by corners. 4.5 tenths slower than Leclerc. I think even Aston Martin, to a degree, will be baffled as to why they're that much slower than the Ferrari team. It doesn't really make that much sense to me, at least. Only just slightly quicker than the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, and only slightly quicker than the McLaren of Lando Norris, right in there for McLaren. And McLaren, really, in the corners, have a car that is, at least for this weekend's race, able to compete with the Aston Martin and Mercedes teams. The issue, again, is that McLaren have very poor straight line speed, and that's why they aren't quite as quick overall for the entire lap as Mercedes and Aston Martin. Very impressive speed from Yuki Tsunoda and the AlphaTauri. And then for the rest of the teams, the only surprise really is just, again, how with Alpine, how they're not quite lapping at a speed that you would expect them to. I mean, for them to be 3.5 tenths slower in the middle sector compared to McLaren, despite McLaren's improvement, is a bit poor. They really should be, I'd say, a couple tenths of a second quicker than they were, and that would have seen them into Q3 with Ocon. But of course, they ended up lapping at this pace. But Ferrari and Red Bull, again, in the middle sector, absolutely dominant. And then the final sector, there's not really much you can read into this, because a lot of these sector times can be influenced by, certain drivers getting a tow from another car. But it was Verstappen the quickest in the final sector, with Hamilton second, and then Alonso third, Leclerc fourth, and then Williams fifth, AlphaTauri sixth, Ocon seventh for Alpine, Haas eighth with Hulkenberg, Piastri ninth for McLaren, and then 10th, Alfa Romeo. Again, surprising with Alfa Romeo how they're so slow in a straight line for some reason with this car. It seems as though they have just issues with the way the engine works in their car. I'm not quite sure. I mean, we'll look at the speed trap in a moment. Their speed actually is pretty good, but I just don't get why they're so slow in the final sector. There's not much to read really into these final sector times. And we'll quickly go on to the best top speeds. This data is from the start-finish line speed trap. So Williams, no surprise, they are the quickest by 1 kilometer per hour over Red Bull. And Alfa Romeo, doing a good top speed, but they're just not, it's not really playing out with the lap time. I just don't really understand it. And then you've got, the Haas in fourth, no surprise really there. AlphaTauri fifth, Mercedes sixth, that's pretty good for them. Ferrari in seventh. I do wonder, maybe Ferrari, because they've got such strong engine power, I am wondering whether they probably put a bit more downforce on their car than they would have done normally to be as quick as they were in the middle sector to try and really compete with Red Bull. I do wonder whether, they did do that with their car setup. Alpine down in eighth, and then no surprise, Aston Martin and McLaren, the two slowest teams. And McLaren, you can see there, despite being a couple tenths of a second away from the Mercedes, of Hamilton in qualifying. The McLaren at best 4 kilometers an hour slower than the Mercedes in the main speed trap, which is quite a lot of time to be losing in a straight line. And, you know, if you go look back at the Sector 1 and Sector 2 times, McLaren, up until the start of the final sector, McLaren are clearly quicker than Mercedes. It's just that final sector. So, yeah, McLaren have got a good car. It's just they've still got really big issues when it comes to their draggy car. But we'll go back to these results quickly. And what do you call it? And by the way, Josiah saying in the chat, I don't think Fernando had any DRS issues in quali. It was announced that he did have DRS issues. It came out that he did in Q3. And also Stroll, we saw visually having DRS issues as well. So that's why Aston Martin overall did not have a good qualifying result, but I'm sure they can repair that later in the weekend. But in terms of what happened in qualifying today and what the pace is looking like in the pecking order, I would say with lower fuel running, I think Ferrari have probably got just about the quicker car compared to Red Bull. When we get to the race, though, I think that's going to turn. The actual race on Sunday, I think that's going to turn quite a bit. With the sprint tomorrow, I mean, the sprint is only going to be what? Is it only like 20 laps? 23 laps, I think it is. Let me just quickly check the amount of laps officially that the sprint is. And the sprint is actually only 17 laps. That isn't really enough to see Ferrari suffer really bad tyre wear that Red Bull could really benefit from. It will be close between Ferrari and Red Bull in the sprint tomorrow, but I think Ferrari will probably be with Leclerc a tad quicker. And Leclerc, obviously, if he can get pole position for the race on Sunday, you have to assume for sprint qualifying tomorrow morning that Leclerc would be able to go out there and get pole position for the sprint as well. There's no reason he can't do that. So, yeah, I don't see why Ferrari can't win the sprint tomorrow, to be honest. I think them and Red Bull really will be the two quickest teams, very close to one another. The third quickest team is going to be probably Aston Martin, because, again, they had their DRS issues. And then fourth best team, I think, will probably be Mercedes, and then McLaren fifth, and then probably AlphaTauri as the sixth best team, I would say, in the sprint. And that's purely because, again, it's only 17 laps. If it was a proper 51-lap race, like the actual race will be on Sunday, then I would say Alpine would be, the quicker team compared to AlphaTauri. But because it's only going to be 17 laps, I think that'll help AlphaTauri. And, it will help AlphaTauri be, again, pretty quick in sprint qualifying and the sprint race as well. And wouldn't be surprised at all if Tsunoda in the sprint qualifying ended up, in the top 10 or maybe just outside the top 10, because he has been really on fire around this track this weekend and does have a pretty good pace around here. Was very quick here last year at this track and in 2021 as well. For the sprint, Ferrari, Red Bull, Aston Martin, then Mercedes, then McLaren, then AlphaTauri, then probably Alpine. Followed up by, in terms of the pecking order and who will be quick, probably then Williams after that, and then Haas and Alfa Romeo to be the slowest team. So that's how I assume the pace will be tomorrow. Of course, with sprint qualifying, it'll be early in the morning. They have to use the medium tyre in Q1 and Q2. But as long as the drivers all, have a normal session, then I think the pace will turn out to be pretty similar to what we saw in qualifying. And then in the sprint, I assume it'll, that type of pace will play out again. But for Sunday's race, it should be a bit different as to what we saw here in qualifying. But the sprint will be competitive. There is no doubt about that. We're going to get overtaking, we're going to get racing. But yeah, I think considering the sprint, it's not like it sets the grid for the race anymore. I don't think the drivers are going to be taking that big a risk. And I definitely would not be taking that big of a risk in the sprint now that it does not set the grid for Sunday's race. Because what's the point? There's no point. There's no point, risking your life or risking, having to have the team pay out a load of money in damages for an unnecessary accident. So yeah, I think it's not going to be the greatest sprint tomorrow. It's not going to be just all action everywhere, but there will be some closeness, some racing, but just nothing absolutely special to scream about or anything like that. Of course, let me know in the chat whether you agree or disagree with that or not. I will quickly, though, before I move on to the teams and go through respectively how I think they'll do, let me just do a poll in the chat quickly. So who do you think will win the F1 sprint in Baku? And the options will be Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez, and I'll put Alonso as another option. I don't think Carlos Sainz has a chance, really, of winning the sprint. But yeah, let me know, who do you think will win the sprint? I think it's probably going to be Leclerc or Verstappen winning the what do you call it? Winning the sprint. Sparky Pete, hello to you, says also, we can't say it's not worth risking their lives in a sprint, but in the race is okay. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, driving an F1 car is risking your life. Everyone accepts the risk, but there's no point going as aggressive as possible and pushing as hard as you can like you would do at certain points in the actual race when you do need to save your car a bit for the race itself, the most important thing. So yeah, Colo says and makes a good point, it gives us data on the teams who did the long runs. Yeah, it should help with that. Anyway, let's move on to the teams, and I'll get a bit more now into why I think they'll end up with the results, or why I think they'll be, kind of in the area that I think they'll be for the sprint. So we'll start, of course, with Red Bull Racing, who today looked quick, but just not as quick compared to the rest of the field as I thought they would be. And yeah, Red Bull, I don't think they have, I don't think they need to be panicking or anything, because we know Ferrari can easily self-destruct. They do it almost every weekend. Well, at this rate, pretty much every weekend. But yeah, just not that impressive with their pace. And now, with the sprint race coming up, it does create that added risk. Now that they're going to have to be racing, most likely Ferrari, who I am sure in sprint qualifying tomorrow morning will be very quick again, at least with Charles Leclerc. It now creates that risk for Red Bull of having maybe some accidents and getting into trouble that in other weekends when they were really super quick, they wouldn't have necessarily got into that trouble. So that's going to be a bit of a pain in the backside for the Red Bull team. But as long as they just avoid trouble, get their heads down and show the the real proper pace we know they've got, they should be absolutely fine. They've still got a very good chance of winning the sprint tomorrow. I still think if you're going to say, or if you're going to ask who is the favourite to win the sprint tomorrow, I'd probably say Red Bull, because they, even though Leclerc was quicker today, it's not like Sainz was right up there as well. The only person Ferrari have to fight Red Bull is Charles Leclerc. So Red Bull are still the favourites, I would say, for the sprint, but with Leclerc there and with Ferrari definitely being, quite a bit faster than we expected, it creates that risk of something really going wrong in the sprint race itself. But like I said, as long as they get their heads down and just show their real pace, they should be fine. Of course, they don't need to take massive risks if they're not in first place, because obviously the sprint, doesn't decide the grid for Sunday's race. And there are still points on offer in the sprint as well, and can help them build an even further lead over the closer cars behind them in the championship. Of course, Charles Leclerc is not one of those closer cars. Leclerc is P10 in the championship, remember. Hasn't even got 10 points on the board for the season. So, yeah, they don't need to be, taking any stupid risks, and, just try and do what they can, but not go too crazy, and then hopefully set themselves up, or not set themselves up. I need to remember that, of course, the sprint race does not set the grid for Sunday's race. Try and get some confidence going for Sunday that that they've got the package for sure to win the race and still be clearly the best team on the grid. Of course, we'll see on Sunday. But yeah, for the sprint tomorrow, I think they're definitely the favourites. Whether they do win or not, again, depends really on what Charles Leclerc does. And talking of Charles Leclerc, let's just go straight on to the Ferrari team. Brilliant job by Leclerc today. And obviously Leclerc, it's not a surprise to a certain extent that, they didn't, that Leclerc, that Leclerc is so quick around here. Obviously had pole position in 2021 and 2022 at this circuit. But, for him, again, to produce such a brilliant lap was just so great to see. And great to see Leclerc, after the last couple races of just awfulness for him, roaring back into life. It is really, good to see from him. But can he keep that up, and can Ferrari keep that up for sprint qualifying and the sprint race? I don't see why they can't. They should be fine. I don't see, unless they have, engine issues like Alpine did today, I don't really see how they're going to be, in a much worse position tomorrow, unless maybe the track conditions are in a much different place that maybe throws off their pace. But to me, they should be absolutely fine. And, I expect Charles Leclerc to be right up there fighting with Verstappen and Perez. And if he does get pole for the sprint race in sprint qualifying tomorrow morning, then I could absolutely see him holding on and winning the sprint race, which would be great to see. And, of course, would properly get his season going. Of course, he's not going to be fighting for the championship this year, but it would be nice to see him have another good season, considering, considering, the car and the team and the situation he is in. For Carlos Sainz, though, he is quite clearly lagging very far behind. 0.8 of a second slower than Leclerc in Q3. And that was not because of a poor lap from Carlos. He was lagging behind the entire qualifying session. And my expectation for Carlos is that at best he'll be in P4 in sprint qualifying and the sprint race. And to be honest, I think he'll be lucky to finish P4 in the sprint race, because his pace in that car is non-existent. And he's quite lucky, to be honest, that he's in that car this weekend, because if he was in a Mercedes, he would be way down the field. He'd be knocked out easily in Q2. So, yeah, Carlos really far off the pace. But for this man, looking very good, and he is, without doubt, one of the favourites to win the sprint tomorrow. Let me know in the poll and in chat whether you think he can win, possibly, the sprint. But we'll go through the rest of the teams. Mercedes, yeah. Lewis Hamilton did a good job, getting up to P5, but I think it's pretty clear to see Mercedes are struggling with their pace. They are, just not quite anywhere near, really, as quick as they were in Melbourne. In Melbourne, they were at least on the pace, if not quicker than Ferrari for the entire weekend. Here, I mean, Hamilton was a second off Leclerc in qualifying. That is, quite a difference from what we saw in Melbourne. Obviously, two different tracks in terms of the corners and the speed of the corners, which I think does make for Mercedes in a negative way a really big difference. But the pace does not look good. They look to be, at best, as I expected coming into this weekend, the fourth best team. And arguably, if Lando Norris, has another good day tomorrow in sprint quali and the sprint race, I could see Norris fighting with Hamilton in the sprint race. They just got to really, Mercedes, grab any points they can to limit the damage, because it really does not look good. Their pace at the minute really doesn't look good. And if Aston Martin fix their DRS issues for tomorrow, they will certainly be quicker than them, at least with Alonso. So really not good if you're a Mercedes fan. But luckily, only 3 more weeks and you'll have loads of new upgrades to get into. And hopefully this team will be a lot quicker. But for the sprint, I would be, to be honest, I'd be surprised if they finish in the top 5. I think their pace is pretty bad. The race should be better for them. But the sprint, forget about it. It's not going to be really anything of note if you're a Mercedes fan. Aston Martin, we'll go on to them. And they had DRS issues in Q3. We saw it in practice 1. But in Q3, they popped up again for both cars. And a shame, a real shame for Aston Martin, because they were quicker than Mercedes in qualifying. But with those DRS issues, they couldn't show it, which is a shame. But they're still looking decent. I mean, I expected coming into this weekend for them to be third best team in quali anyway. I mean, their gap to Ferrari is a bit excessive in how far off they are. I think once Aston Martin fix their DRS issues, they're probably about 3/4 of a second slower than Ferrari over a single lap. But as long as they can just grab some good points in the sprint tomorrow, I don't think they'll really care about the lack of pace over a single lap. And of course, remember, Ferrari are 40 points behind almost in the championship. Mercedes, their closest rival, 9 points behind them. Aston Martin currently in second. So as long as Aston Martin outscore or equal the amount of points that Mercedes score tomorrow, that's all that matters. And I think they've got a pretty good chance of outscoring Mercedes, because Alonso, as long as the DRS issues don't come up again, he should be absolutely fine to be ahead of both Mercedes cars. And Lance Stroll should be giving the Mercedes boys some trouble as well, and maybe splitting them in the sprint order. But Aston Martin, I think, definitely are quicker than Mercedes this weekend. Whether it's quali trim, race trim, I have no doubt about it. Aston Martin are faster than the Mercedes team. Just need to fix those DRS problems so they don't, lose out on, some better positions they can get to make their life a bit easier this weekend in what is currently the fight for, in the fight for second in the championship. But now, what we're going to do is whiz through the rest of the teams. This is not going to be a super long stream, to be honest, because I'm pretty tired. So I'm going to whiz through the rest of the teams. Then I'll come to your comments in the chat. Don't worry. And then we will come to the end of the stream at that point. Before I go on to anything, though, just a quick update as to my schedule going forward. So tomorrow I will not be streaming. as I've said a million times before today. On Sunday, though, I will be live for the race preview and race watch along. I'll be going live at 10 a.m. UK time, 2 hours that is before the race starts. Firstly for the build-up, then the watch along, then a reaction as well afterwards. And then on Monday evening, if there is enough to talk about from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend, there will be a live review of that stuff on Monday evening at 8 p.m. UK time. So make sure to come along to that stuff on Sunday and Monday as well. And if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. It would be great if you could do so. And as well, don't forget to smash that like button. Let's try and get up to like 20 likes or so if we can by the end of this stream. But yeah, let's go through the rest of the teams. Alpine, yeah, what a terrible day. Very poor reliability in practice one. Gasly's car catching on fire. Then Gasly crashing in Q1. Esteban Ocon at least got through to Q2, but didn't do a great job after that and ended up in P12. And yeah, Alpine have set themselves up for a pretty bad weekend, because the issue now is because they, in practice one, didn't get the laps in and missed out on time to properly set up the car, it's now going to affect them for the rest of the weekend. So tomorrow, I don't expect them to be that much quicker, really. And then on Sunday, they should be, over a race distance, a bit better than how they qualified. But again, because of their setup issues that they're probably going to be having for Sunday's race, because they didn't get the car properly set up for the race and for the race weekend, again, it's going to affect them. So yeah, this is not going to be a good weekend for Alpine, and it is such a really bad thing for Alpine now, because of course with McLaren's massive improvement, they really need to get back on it, because McLaren are going to be pulling away from them quite quickly if they don't get their act together. Because so far this season, Alpine, they've got a good car, but as I've said before this season, they don't have a good enough driver lineup to really get the best out of that car. And when they have had good pace with Ocon and Gasly, they've not delivered the results they should have. In Bahrain, yeah, Gasly finished, 9th from the back of the field, but Ocon had a disastrous race when really he should have been in the points. And then in Australia, they should have scored lots of points in that race, 10 plus at least, and ended up crashing into one another. So Alpine have got to get their act together, because McLaren, they will pull away very quickly if they don't. And yeah, I don't see it being a great rest of the weekend. And I think the chances of them scoring points in the sprint tomorrow, not impossible, but not great, I would say. Probably 15 to 20% chance at the absolute highest. And I'm being quite generous with my, with saying that. I am being very, very generous when it comes to the Alpine team. For McLaren, though, thank God these upgrades to the floor have clearly worked. Their car much quicker, both cars into Q3, and both cars starting in the top 10 for Sunday's race. And yeah, McLaren are looking a lot more so back to how they were at times last year, and even back in 2021 to a certain extent. Really good to see. And yeah, McLaren definitely now here to play in 2023. And I don't see why they won't continue this good speed tomorrow. I mean, Lando Norris in practice one was in P5 straight away out of the blocks. So again, I don't see why they can't just straight away on Saturday morning get out there and deliver great laps and be in it'll be, into Q3 quite comfortably. And then in the sprint race, they should be pretty quick as well, and should be getting at least one car into the top 8. And of course, the top 8 only score points in the sprint. And even 1 or 2 points would be vital for them to just pull away ever so slightly from Alpine behind them. But yeah, great for McLaren to see their improvements. Still, their drag is a massive issue. That's probably an issue that possibly they're always going to have, unless they can try and get that fixed for, say, next season. Once they can, fundamentally design a completely new car in the way that, they clearly want to, after obviously James Key has left the team a month or so ago. But things looking very good for McLaren. And very soon, when we come to some tracks where straight line speed won't matter, such as Monaco, watch out for McLaren. Watch out for this team. They are going to be really, really quick, especially with Lando Norris, who we know can really turn things up when he wants to, and can really cause, on a regular basis, as we saw a couple years ago, some major surprises. So, yeah, McLaren, there's going to be some races this season where they really get right up in there with your Mercedes, Aston Martin, and Ferrari teams. They're really going to be able to do that from now on, I think. And of course, later in the season, I think right before the summer break in Hungary, they are bringing, according to them, basically a completely new car. So the upgrades only going to keep coming, big upgrades from McLaren, and let's hope it keeps improving them in 2023 and keeps them moving back up in the right direction after a bit of a downturn in the last year or so. But yeah, for the sprint tomorrow, they should be, outside of the top 4 teams, they should be the best team from the rest of the pack. Alfa Romeo, not really much to say about them. Bottas was ahead of Zhou. Good to see Bottas performing better than he was in the last couple races. But yeah, Alfa Romeo are absolute shit. We'll now go on to Haas F1, who are also absolute shit. Don't know why they were so slow in the first sector, as I showed earlier. They should have been a lot quicker. Yeah, I just don't understand that whatsoever. Kevin Magnussen did have engine issues, but I don't really get why Hulkenberg was also, though, still very, very slow. And given that we're already right into the weekend and they can't really do anything to the cars now, this pace will probably just continue itself for the rest of the weekend. So yeah, Haas back to kind of the bad old pace that they showed at times back in 2022, which is a shame. AlphaTauri obviously had a very good day today. Yuki Tsunoda getting up to P8, and he will start there for Sunday's race. And I don't see why Tsunoda can't get a top 10 or be around the top 10 for sprint qualifying and the sprint race tomorrow as well. Looked very quick when he wasn't touching the wall like he did in practice 1. Looked very quick throughout the session. And Tsunoda, we have seen this season, has been really, really good. So yeah, watch out for Tsunoda. He's always been very quick here, and I don't see why he can't have another good day tomorrow. For Nick De Vries, though, tomorrow he needs to treat as really a clean slate, because what happened today was really unforgivable. He, had a good practice 1. I think was 6th in practice 1. And then first run in Q1 makes a simple, basic driving error. Just goes too deep into the corner and goes straight into the barriers, nose first. Simply not good enough from him. And he's not showing what he can actually do. He's performing too poorly. And I don't think, by the way, this is De Vries' potential. I think he is better than this, but I think he's just not, performing when it actually matters. The pace, I think, is there, and it can be there. But again, he's just not producing it when he has to. I mean, of course, it's only the 4th race of the season. We don't need to be going over the top or criticism with Nick. But yeah, he just isn't delivering when it matters. And like I said, tomorrow he needs to treat it as a clean slate, forget about what happened in qualifying, and just crack on. Clearly the car's quick. That's why Tsunoda was having a good day today. So yeah, just needs to crack on, deliver what the car, what he can in the car, and then should be then in a decent position for the sprint race, and then have a okay result in the sprint race that then gives him some confidence for the race on Sunday, even though he'll be starting at the very back of the field. But yeah, terrible from him, but great from Tsunoda, and I don't see why he can't continue his heroics tomorrow. And finally, we will go on to Williams. And yeah, the only surprising thing with Williams, as I showed earlier, was in the first sector, they just weren't really that quick. And I think that's what cost them a better grid position. Probably, in the end, didn't have the pace really to get into Q3. But yeah, they could have maybe got a position or two better with both cars if they were just a tad quicker in the first sector, and as quick as I thought they would be in that first sector. So, yeah, a bit disappointing there for Williams. But, you know, for Sunday's race, 13th and 15th is a good position to be in. I don't see why they can't go on to good things from there. And, of course, tomorrow is a new day, a fresh start, and you know, is a chance to put things right that maybe they feel needs to be put right from yesterday. So, Williams have got a good opportunity tomorrow to get a decent finish. Of course, if they can try and grab a point, that would be great to get themselves ahead of AlphaTauri, unless AlphaTauri can grab even more points than them. But yeah, we'll see what they can do tomorrow. But the chances of them scoring points is probably, you know, 5-10%, I would say, in the sprint. Of course, in the race where there's more point positions on offer, I think there's definitely a better chance for them to grab something. But yeah, tomorrow they'll be in there with Alpine, other teams, you know, McLaren to a certain extent, AlphaTauri, but I don't think they'll have enough in the end. But we'll go back to these pictures, and now we'll come to you guys in the chat to see what you guys are having to say, and I'll read off your comments before I head off, and also I'll make sure to finish off the poll. Laurie Rastogi, good to see you, mate, says Sainz has been very disappointing for the last year and a bit. He's a midfield driver at best. Yeah, I agree. Carlos has proven quite clearly that he's not on that elite level. He just isn't. He is on the same level, Carlos, as Sergio Perez. You know, your Esteban Ocons, your Pierre Gaslys. That is the level that Carlos Sainz is on. And, you know, that's the reality. It's a shame to say that because I was a big fan of the guy, but he is not on that level. He's not on the level of Leclerc, Verstappen, Hamilton, Alonso, even at this point, Lando Norris. I just don't think he's on that level. And I think, honestly, he might be past his best because his absolute peak was about 2 to 3 years ago. Since then, just hasn't looked the same. I don't know if it's because those cars back then, he just liked a lot more with the way those cars worked, but yeah, he's just not the same driver. Actually, I misread that comment earlier from Colo, who actually said, give us the data on the teams who did the long runs, rather than it will give us the sprint, the data for the teams who did the long runs. In practice one, nobody did really any long runs, so we can't really look at that data. In terms of the long run data that I always analyze for the race, I will be looking at really the lap time data from the sprint race itself to determine who has good race pace and who does not. Greg Martinez says Red Bull did not push it to the limit. I disagree with that. Remember, qualifying today set the grid for Sunday's race. There's no reason not to push to the limit. Sparky Pete says we know Red Bull is more about race pace and Ferrari is a lot more about qualifying, or was last year. It is still really the same with those teams. And Sparky also saying, I would like to see Charles win, apart from the Mercedes drivers, but Max will win in my opinion. I think he's on another race pace level from Charles in my opinion. And Amarin Tanch, I think it is, says we will need a few red flags for the race to be exciting. Let's hope not. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along. Let me just quickly end the poll in the chat. And I asked you guys, who do you think will win the sprint tomorrow? And 22 votes, you guys, for the majority of the vote, went for Max Verstappen, with Leclerc second, Perez third, and Alonso fourth. Nobody voting for Fernando Alonso. But guys, cheers for coming along for this stream. And not just this stream, but if you came along for the stream earlier, again, massive thank you for that. And again, reminder here on screen of my schedule for Sunday and Monday, the next 2 live streams. Won't be around tomorrow, but I will be around on Sunday for the race preview and race watch along. Be live at 10 a.m. UK time to kick off the coverage of the main event of the weekend, all the way through until 2:30 p.m. And then on Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time, I'll be live to do a weekend review. But that, again, that is only if there is enough talking points to go through. We'll see. Hopefully there is. But yeah, I'll let you guys know, of course, after the race, whether there will be enough to do a weekend review. But guys, yeah, thank you so much for coming along for all the streams today. Hopefully you guys do enjoy the sprint qualifying and sprint race. I will catch up on the highlights probably tomorrow night. I'm going to be doing other things in the afternoon. That's why I'm not going to be watching the sprint itself. So yeah, hope you enjoy the sprint. And of course, I will see you on Sunday morning, or Sunday morning my time. But quickly again, don't forget to subscribe for all that content coming up. Don't forget to smash the like button on your way out. Obviously does help the channel grow with the algorithm. And don't forget as well to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5 and join my Discord server, link below in the description for more content like this. But guys, until the race watch along that I'll be doing on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. UK time, it has been me, ChazzaHD. Goodbye.